The morning light poured through the cafe windows, painting soft golden stripes across the wooden tables. Danielle Rhodes moved between them with practiced grace, balancing a tray in one hand and a tired smile on her face. It was her second shift of the week and the day had barely begun. The place smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, a comfort she clung to between orders. She didn't notice him at first. Most people didn't expect someone like him in a small cafe like this. Jonas Wexler, billionaire investor, owner of half a dozen tech firms, walked in wearing a suit so crisp it looked allergic to wrinkles. His watch gleamed brighter than the morning sun, his shoes made no sound, and his expression carried the sharpness of someone used to being obeyed. He glanced around the cafe with mild distaste before taking a seat by the window, as though the place itself was beneath him. Danielle approached, not yet knowing who he was, just another customer in an expensive suit. "Good morning," she said politely, pen in hand. "Can I get you something to drink while you wait?" Jonas didn't look up from his phone. "Still water, bottled, room temperature." His tone wasn't harsh, but it carried that quiet arrogance of people who command entire boardrooms. Danielle nodded and turned to fetch the water. Behind her, Jonas began speaking to someone on the phone, in German. His voice dropped to a calm murmur, the kind meant to sound private, but wasn't. When she returned, Jonas's assistant had joined him, also speaking in German. Danielle caught fragments of the conversation. She had lived in Berlin for 3 years. Her German was fluent, though she hadn't used it in months. At first she ignored it, but then she heard something that froze her mid-step. The assistant said softly, "She doesn't seem very bright, does she?" Jonas chuckled, replying in the same language. "You can tell by her face. Probably lucky to even have this job." The words cut through the hum of the cafe like glass breaking. Danielle blinked once, forcing a smile back onto her lips. They thought she couldn't understand. That gave her power. A small, quiet power she hadn't expected to feel that morning. When Jonas's business partner arrived, an older man with kind eyes and a heavy accent, the three of them switched fully to German, laughing occasionally between bites of conversation. Jonas ordered his coffee without even looking up. "Black," he said flatly, "and make it quick." Danielle nodded again, her politeness a mask she'd perfected over the years. As she poured the coffee, she could still hear Jonas's voice drifting from the table. "These people," he said in German, always smiling, never realizing how small their world really is. His companion gave a polite, uneasy laugh. She placed the coffees in front of them. "2 black coffees," she said gently. Jonas gave no response. Only when she turned to walk away did she hear him mutter again in German. Another remark about her looks, something that made her blood warm in her veins, but she didn't react. Not yet. Instead, Danielle waited. She refilled cups, cleared tables, smiled at regulars. All while every word from Jonas's table sank deeper into her mind. They talked business, numbers, people, deals, and every so often another cruel joke about the waitress. Her heart pounded, but she stayed calm. There was no power in anger. The real power would come in the silence before the storm, in the moment when arrogance met truth. Jonas was finishing his omelet when she returned to the table to collect their plates. He didn't thank her. He didn't even look up. He was mid-sentence, speaking again in German. "At least she's doing her job," he said with a small laugh. That was the final spark. Danielle straightened her posture, her tray balanced perfectly. Then, in flawless German, she said, "It's interesting you talk about people's intelligence when you assume no one understands you." The words hung in the air like lightning waiting to strike. Jonas's fork froze halfway to his mouth. His assistant blinked in shock. The older man sat perfectly still. Danielle continued, her voice calm but unshakable. "I studied at Humboldt University in Berlin. I understand everything you've said since you sat down." The color drained from Jonas's face. His arrogant mask faltered, replaced by the unmistakable look of a man caught off guard for the first time in a very long while. The cafe had gone quiet, the background chatter fading into stillness. Danielle didn't stop. "You judged me the moment you saw me," she said softly. "But here's the truth. The language you used to mock me is the one I learned while earning my master's degree. And every single word you said today tells me more about you than it ever did about me. Jonas didn't move. For the first time, he had no clever line, no polite smirk to hide behind. Danielle placed the empty tray on their table, her eyes meeting his. Next time you speak about someone, she added, make sure you're not doing it in front of someone who understands more than you think. Then she turned and walked away, calm, composed, and completely in control. Behind her, Jonas sat frozen, the reality of his own arrogance settling like ice in his chest. His assistant stared at the table, too ashamed to speak. The older man gave a quiet sigh, the kind of sigh that says everything words can't. The cafe returned to its gentle rhythm, cups clinking, coffee steaming, conversations resuming. But for Jonas Wexler, the morning had shifted forever. He'd walked in to measure another person's worth, and instead discovered the size of his own ignorance. The next morning, the cafe felt different. The same sunlight filtered through the windows, the same aroma of coffee filled the air, but to Danielle, everything carried a quiet intensity. The scene from yesterday replayed in her mind, the shock on Jonas's face, the silence that followed, the way the entire room had seemed to hold its breath. She didn't regret a single word. Still, part of her wondered if there would be consequences. Men like Jonas Wexler didn't handle embarrassment well. He wasn't just any customer. He was a man whose money and name carried weight. Danielle brushed off the thought and tied her apron. Another day, she whispered to herself. Another start. But the day didn't stay quiet for long. Around mid-morning, a sleek black car pulled up outside the cafe, the kind that didn't belong on this street. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Jonas Wexler stepped out, his assistant trailing behind him once again. The moment Danielle saw him through the window, her heart skipped. She half expected him to storm in and demand an apology. Instead, he looked composed, too composed. That made her cautious. He entered with that same deliberate walk, the air around him thick with unspoken tension. Danielle stayed behind the counter pretending to polish a cup. Jonas's eyes scanned the room until they found hers. Then he approached slowly, each step calculated. Miss Rhodes, he said evenly, may I have a word? The cafe went quiet again. Even Miguel peeked from the kitchen. Danielle nodded, keeping her expression calm. Of course. Jonas gestured to a corner table away from the customers. He waited until she sat before speaking. About yesterday, he began, his voice low. You caught me off guard. Danielle folded her hands. I just told the truth. He gave a small nod, his jaw tight. You did, and it wasn't flattering for me. There was a flicker of discomfort in his eyes, something almost human. I didn't come here to argue. I came to apologize. Danielle blinked, not expecting that. Apologize? Yes, Jonas said simply. Made assumptions about you, about people. It was arrogant. I'm not proud of what I said. It wasn't dramatic, but the sincerity in his tone surprised her. Yet she didn't soften easily. You didn't just make assumptions, she replied quietly. You mocked me because you thought I couldn't understand. You used language as a wall. Jonas's eyes lowered for a moment. I know, he admitted, and I deserve to be called out. There was a long pause. The cafe noise slowly returned around them. I'm not sure what else I can say, he added, except, thank you, for reminding me that respect doesn't depend on status. Danielle studied him carefully. It wasn't the kind of apology she expected from a billionaire. He seemed smaller somehow, more grounded. She nodded once. Apology accepted, she said, her tone steady. But maybe next time you could remember that lesson before you open your mouth. Jonas let out a small breath, almost a laugh, and nodded. Fair enough. He stood to leave, but then hesitated. One more thing, he said. I didn't realize until yesterday that you spoke German so fluently. May I ask how? Danielle smiled faintly. Scholarship. I studied linguistics and international business in Berlin. Graduated with honors. Jonas raised his brows. Impressive. What brought you here then? She shrugged lightly. Life doesn't always follow plans. After I came back, I had family responsibilities. The cafe job was supposed to be temporary. For a moment, Jonas didn't respond. Then he said softly, You know, I could use someone with your background. Danielle looked up sharply. What do you mean? He hesitated again, then reached into his coat pocket and handed her a card. I run an international division that handles European investments. We're opening a new branch. If you're ever interested, call me. Danielle stared at the card, stunned. The name Wexler Holdings International gleamed in embossed letters. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you an opportunity, he said carefully. You don't owe me an answer now. Just think about it. Then, before she could respond, he gave a polite nod and left, as quietly as he had arrived. The cafe door closed behind him, leaving Danielle in stunned silence. Miguel appeared from the kitchen. What did he want? Danielle held up the card. I think he just offered me a job. Miguel grinned. You serious? The same guy you roasted in German yesterday? Danielle laughed softly. Yeah, life's strange, huh? That night she sat at her small kitchen table, turning the card over in her hands again and again. Part of her didn't trust it. It could be pity, guilt, or just another test. But another part of her, the one that still dreamed beyond the cafe, wondered if this was fate giving her a second chance. The next morning she woke early, made coffee, and stared at her reflection. You've handled worse, she whispered. Take the chance. Her fingers hovered over her phone. Then, with a deep breath, she dialed the number printed on the card. A woman's voice answered. Wexler Holdings, this is Ms. Kent. Danielle hesitated for half a second. Hi, she said finally. This is Danielle Rhodes. Mr. Wexler gave me his card. There was a pause, then a warm tone. Yes, Miss Rhodes. He mentioned you. We'd like to schedule a meeting at headquarters, tomorrow morning, if that works. Danielle's eyes widened. Tomorrow? Yes, Mr. Wexler personally requested it. As she ended the call, her heart raced. The man who once mocked her was now opening a door she never thought possible. She didn't know what awaited her in that meeting, whether it was redemption, an opportunity, or another test of pride. But one thing was certain. Danielle Rhodes was done being underestimated. The next morning arrived with a nervous chill in the air. Danielle stood in front of her mirror adjusting the collar of her simple white blouse. It wasn't new, but it was neat, clean, and pressed. Her dark hair was tied back, her makeup subtle. She wanted to look confident, not desperate. The card on her table glinted under the light, Wexler Holdings International. She had barely slept. Part of her still couldn't believe the billionaire she'd confronted was now inviting her to his corporate office. Every part of her wanted to be cautious, but curiosity and pride won the battle. This was a chance she couldn't ignore. By 9 a.m., she was standing in front of a skyscraper of glass and steel, the company's logo shining above the entrance. The lobby was breathtaking, marble floors, modern art, and a quiet hum of power in the air. Every person who walked by looked like they belonged to a different world. Tailored suits, confident strides, Bluetooth earpieces. Danielle felt like an intruder, but she kept her chin high. The receptionist greeted her with a polite smile. Good morning. Name, please? Danielle Rhodes. I have an appointment with Mr. Wexler. The woman typed quickly and nodded. Yes, Miss Rhodes. He's expecting you. Take the private elevator to the 27th floor. The ride felt endless. Her reflection in the mirrored walls stared back, calm on the outside, storming on the inside. When the doors opened, she stepped into a space that looked more like an art gallery than an office. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city skyline. A man in a gray suit approached her with a friendly nod. Miss Rhodes, he said warmly, Mr. Wexler will see you now. Jonas stood near the window, hands in his pockets, looking out over the city. When he turned, he smiled, an actual smile this time, not the polite smirk she'd seen before. "Danielle, I'm glad you came. Thank you for inviting me," she said cautiously, taking the offered seat. He studied her for a moment. "You handled yourself remarkably well yesterday," he began. "Most people would have shouted or walked away. You didn't. You stayed composed, and that impressed me." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "So, this is about composure?" He chuckled softly. "Partly, but it's also about talent. I did my research after I left the cafe." Her pulse quickened. "You... what?" "I looked you up," Jonas admitted, leaning forward. "Your academic record from Humboldt University, your language certifications, even your papers on cultural business ethics. You're overqualified for the job you have." Danielle blinked, unsure whether to feel flattered or uneasy. "That's personal information." "It's public enough," he replied smoothly. "I like to understand people before I work with them." "Work with them?" she repeated. Jonas nodded. "Yes, I'm offering you a position. We're expanding our European operations, and I need someone fluent in German who understands both cultures. You'd assist with translation, communication, and negotiations. The pay would be..." He paused with a faint grin. "Much better than a cafe wage." Danielle sat back, stunned. "Why me?" "Because you earned my respect," Jonas said simply. "And because you made me realize how blind I've been. You saw through me when no one else dared to." She hesitated. "And if I say no?" He shrugged. "Then I'll respect that too. But something tells me you're not meant to stay where you are." For a long moment, silence filled the room. The offer was tempting, life-changing even. Yet doubt lingered. "What if this is just guilt?" she asked quietly. "You felt bad about what you said, and now you're trying to make it right." Jonas leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe that's how it started. But this," he gestured toward her, "isn't about guilt anymore. It's about potential. I recognize it because I used to have to prove mine too." His honesty caught her off guard. For the first time, Danielle saw not the billionaire. Danielle's first week at Wexler Holdings felt like stepping into another universe. Gone were the sounds of clinking coffee cups and the smell of roasted beans, replaced by sleek conference rooms, glowing screens, and the low murmur of executives discussing millions. She had an office now, modest but with a breathtaking view of the skyline. Every day she arrived early, eager but cautious, knowing that eyes were on her. Some coworkers greeted her with polite curiosity, others with hidden skepticism. Whispers followed her in corridors. "She's the one from the cafe," someone said once, thinking she couldn't hear. But Danielle had learned long ago how to turn whispers into fuel. She smiled, worked harder, and let her results speak louder than their doubts. Jonas kept his distance, at least publicly. He was professional in meetings, composed and respectful, but occasionally she caught him watching her, not with arrogance, but with something closer to pride. Their dynamic had shifted. He was no longer the man who looked down on her, and she was no longer the woman afraid to speak up. By the second week, Jonas invited her into a high-level meeting with foreign investors from Berlin. "You'll translate and assist in negotiations," he said. "They trust German efficiency more than American promises." Danielle nodded. She knew this was more than a task. It was a test. The meeting began in a glass conference room overlooking the city. The investors, 2 men and a woman, spoke quickly in German, their tone sharp, their patience thin. Jonas presented figures, but the atmosphere grew tense. The investors whispered among themselves, assuming Danielle was just a translator, not a strategist. When they began questioning the company's credibility, Danielle leaned forward and spoke in flawless German, her voice clear and confident. "Gentlemen, if I may, Wexler Holdings isn't just promising profits. We're building partnerships. The difference is trust, not numbers." The investors looked at her startled, then listened closely. Her calm authority shifted the energy in the room. Jonas watched silently, impressed. When the meeting ended, the lead investor shook her hand first, in respect, not politeness. After they left, Jonas turned to her with a faint smile. You just saved a multi-million-dollar deal. Danielle shrugged lightly. Maybe they just needed someone to speak their language, both literally and professionally. Jonas nodded. And maybe they needed someone who understands both humility and strength. That afternoon, the office buzzed. Word spread fast. The cafe girl had just impressed German investors who once turned down Wexler himself. Some congratulated her, others looked threatened, but Danielle stayed focused. Later that evening, Jonas called her to his office. "Close the door," he said. His tone was serious. "There's something I need your advice on." She sat curious. Jonas handed her a file marked confidential. "We're considering a merger with a logistics firm in Munich. The terms look good, but something feels off. You've seen how these things work in Germany. Tell me what you think." Danielle flipped through the documents, scanning the details quickly. After a few minutes, her brow furrowed. "These numbers don't match the market data," she said. "They're inflating their valuations. If you sign this deal, it'll collapse within months." Jonas leaned back, studying her. "You're sure?" "Positive," she said firmly. "And they're counting on you not to notice." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he smiled slightly. "I knew I made the right choice bringing you in." Over the next few days, Danielle worked closely with Jonas to renegotiate the terms. It wasn't easy. There were calls, tension, and even moments of disagreement. But Jonas began to rely on her judgment more than anyone else's. She became not just an employee, but his most trusted advisor. Still, beneath the progress, Danielle sensed something unspoken. Jonas was different these days, quieter, almost reflective. One evening, as they reviewed reports, she finally asked, "Can I ask you something personal?" Jonas glanced up. "Go ahead." "You used to be so sure of yourself," she said carefully. "Now you seem more careful. What changed?" He was silent for a while. Then he said softly, "You did. That day in the cafe, it shook me. I built my life thinking power made me untouchable. Then a waitress reminded me that real power is respect. It was humiliating, but I needed it." Danielle smiled faintly. "Humility isn't weakness. It's just truth." He nodded slowly. "And truth is expensive." Their eyes met. Not in flirtation, but in mutual understanding. Two people from different worlds, now standing on the same ground. That night, when Danielle left the office, she paused in the lobby, looking up at the tall letters spelling Wexler Holdings. A few weeks ago, she'd been serving coffee. Now she was shaping decisions that moved markets. Life had turned sharply, but not by luck. She whispered to herself, "Respect is the real currency." What she didn't know was that someone in the company had started noticing her rise, someone who didn't like how quickly a former waitress was climbing the ladder. The next challenge wasn't going to come from outside. It was already brewing within the walls of Wexler Holdings. The following weeks at Wexler Holdings were a blur of progress, pressure, and politics. Danielle's name had become known beyond her floor. The woman who saved the German deal. Her calm intelligence and quiet confidence made her stand out, but it also painted a target on her back. Some admired her rise. Others whispered that she was just a lucky outsider. Jonas had started involving her in every major project. She reviewed contracts, joined investor calls, and even sat beside him in meetings where most assistants wouldn't dare speak. Yet power never came without envy. Behind polite smiles, jealousy grew, especially from one man, Richard Hale, the firm's senior operations director. Richard was polished, persuasive, and dangerous in subtle ways. He'd been with the company for years and saw Danielle's sudden influence as a threat. More than once, he'd passed her in the hall with a cold, calculating smile. "Enjoying the fast track?" he once asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. Danielle simply smiled back. "Just doing my job." But Richard wasn't one to leave threats unspoken. One Monday morning, Jonas was called away on a business trip to Zurich, leaving Danielle temporarily in charge of managing the German accounts. It was a major responsibility, and the perfect opening for Richard to act. He invited her to a collaborative review session in the boardroom, pretending to be supportive. Jonas speaks highly of you, he said smoothly as she entered. Let's make sure we maintain that trust. At first, the meeting seemed professional. They discussed reports, projections, and upcoming presentations. But then Richard slid a folder across the table. These are the figures we'll present next week. I just need your signature to confirm them. Danielle glanced at the papers. Something immediately felt wrong. The numbers were too high, unrealistic, almost inflated. These projections don't match our data, she said carefully. Richard's smile didn't waver. They're adjusted estimates, standard practice. Jonas expects results. Danielle looked up, her instincts sharp. Adjusted or manipulated? He leaned back, still smiling. Miss Rhodes, this company thrives on perception. Investors need confidence. Sometimes that means making the future look a little brighter than the present. She pushed the papers back. I won't sign to him. His smile faded. You might want to reconsider. Refusing could make you look uncooperative, and when Jonas returns, he'll expect progress. Then I'll explain it to him myself, Danielle said firmly. With facts. Richard's eyes hardened. You think he'll believe you over me? Danielle stood, gathering her notes. I know, because integrity doesn't need proof. She left the room without another word, but she knew what she'd done. She had just made an enemy. That evening, Richard began spreading quiet rumors. Whispers floated through the office that Danielle had overstepped her role, mishandled data, even tried to take credit for deals she didn't close. None of it was true, but lies have a way of traveling faster than truth. When Jonas returned 2 days later, the tension was palpable. He summoned Danielle immediately. She entered his office, trying to stay composed, but the look on his face was unreadable. Danielle, he began, I've heard some concerning things. People are saying you altered reports. Her heart dropped. That's a lie, she said quickly. Richard asked me to sign false numbers. I refused. Jonas leaned forward, eyes sharp. Do you have proof? No, she admitted, but then it's your word against his, he said quietly. The disappointment in his tone stung more than anger. For a moment, Danielle felt the weight of injustice pressing down on her again. That same feeling she'd known too well in the cafe when people judged without seeing. But she took a deep breath. I won't defend myself with words, she said calmly. I'll prove it. Over the next 48 hours, Danielle worked tirelessly. She dug through financial logs, email threads, timestamps, anything that could connect Richard to the forged projections. Finally, late one night she found it. A digital draft saved under his login credentials, showing the inflated numbers before he deleted them. She compiled everything into a detailed report and sent it straight to Jonas. Then she waited. The next morning, Naz called both of them into his office. The tension was suffocating. Richard tried to speak first. Sir, Jonas held up a hand. Don't bother. I've seen the records. He turned the screen toward Richard, showing the evidence. You tried to frame her. You manipulated company data and nearly jeopardized the deal. Richard's face went pale. It was just an adjustment. Save it, Jonas cut him off. Security will escort you out. As Richard left, Danielle sat quietly, her heartbeat steady but her hands trembling slightly under the desk. Jonas turned to her after a long silence. You were right, he said softly. Again. She exhaled slowly. I wasn't trying to be right. I was trying to be honest. Jonas nodded, pride flickering in his eyes. That's exactly why you belong here. He paused before adding, Danielle, I owe you more than I can say, not just for saving this company, but for reminding me what it means to lead. Her voice softened. You don't owe me anything. Just promise you'll never forget how quickly power can blind people. Jonas smiled faintly. I won't. Not again. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Danielle stood by her office window watching the city glow. She wasn't the waitress anymore or the outsider. She had faced manipulation, lies, and prejudice, and won, not with rage, but with truth. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not as someone underestimated, but as someone unstoppable. But fate wasn't finished testing her. The final lesson was still waiting. and it would challenge everything she thought she knew about justice, humility, and forgiveness. Weeks passed since Richard's downfall and peace returned to Wexler Holdings, or at least the kind of peace that follows a storm. Danielle had become one of the company's most respected figures, her integrity now legendary among employees. People who once whispered behind her back now greeted her with genuine admiration. But for Danielle, it wasn't about pride, it was about principle. She had learned that standing up for truth often came with a price, but that price was always worth paying. Jonas, meanwhile, had changed too. The arrogance that once defined him was gone. He carried himself differently now, still confident, but grounded, human. Where he once saw status, he now saw people. More than once, Danielle caught him thanking the janitors, greeting receptionists by name, or asking interns for their opinions. His transformation was quiet but real, and Danielle saw a reflection of her own journey in his. One Friday morning, Jonas called Danielle into his office. The skyline behind him was glowing in soft gold light. "Close the door," he said, smiling faintly. "I have news." She sat, curious. "I'm retiring from daily operations," he said simply. "It's time for someone else to lead this company forward." Danielle blinked. "You're leaving?" He nodded. "Not leaving. Stepping back. I'll still be on the board. But I want someone who understands both business and humanity to take over as Director of International Relations." She hesitated, unsure where he was going. "Who do you have in mind?" Jonas smiled. "You." The word hit her like a wave. "Me?" she repeated. "Jonas, I can't." "You can," he interrupted gently. "You've already proven more leadership than most people in this building. You faced prejudice, pressure, and politics, and you handled them with grace. You didn't just protect this company, Danielle. You changed it." She stared at him, speechless. "Why me?" "Because you remind me of what I forgot," he said softly. "That success means nothing if it's built on arrogance. You've taught everyone here, including me, what respect really looks like." For the first time, Danielle felt tears threaten to rise, not out of weakness, but out of the quiet validation she'd been denied for so long. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what to say." "Just say yes," Jonas said with a warm grin. She smiled back. "Yes." By the following week, the announcement went public. Danielle Rhodes appointed Director of International Relations at Wexler Holdings International. The news spread fast. Reporters called it an inspiring story of resilience and redemption. Employees filled the lobby to congratulate her. Some even admitted that they'd misjudged her when she first arrived. One afternoon, as she walked through the same cafe where it had all started, she felt a strange pull of memory. The smell of roasted beans, the soft chatter, the small window seat. Everything was the same, yet completely different. The new waitress behind the counter smiled shyly. "You look familiar," she said. Danielle smiled back. "I used to work here." The girl's eyes widened. "Really? What do you do now?" Danielle chuckled softly. "International business." Just then, the cafe door opened, and Jonas walked in. He looked more relaxed now, dressed casually for once. "I thought I'd find you here," he said with a grin. "Some habits never fade." "Old memories," she replied, motioning toward the table by the window. Their table. They sat together, the air calm and reflective. Jonas ordered coffee, black as always, and smiled as the waitress placed it down. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "the last time we were here, I thought I was the smartest man in the room." Danielle smirked. "You learned otherwise." He laughed softly. "Yes, the waitress taught me a few things." They both grew quiet, lost in the memory of that first confrontation. Then Jonas leaned forward. "Do you ever regret calling me out?" Danielle shook her head. "Not for a second. Sometimes people need to hear the truth, even if it burns." Jonas nodded slowly. "And sometimes people need to be humbled to grow." There was a moment of comfortable silence before Danielle said softly, "You know, it's St. Range. All those years studying abroad, I thought success meant a big title or a corner office, but now I think it just means being respected for who you are." Jonas smiled. Then you've achieved more than most billionaires ever will. They both laughed quietly, the sound blending with the hum of the cafe. A circle completed, a lesson learned. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Jonas raised his cup slightly. To respect, he said. Danielle mirrored him, her eyes warm. And to the people who remind us of it. Outside, the world kept moving, busy, loud, unaware of the small moment of peace shared inside a little cafe where humility once met pride. But in that moment, everything came full circle. Danielle Rhodes, once a waitress mocked in a foreign language, had not only earned her respect, but transformed the very man who once belittled her. She had proven that kindness wasn't weakness, intelligence had no color, and true strength needed no permission to speak. Her story wasn't about revenge, it was about redemption. As she stood to leave, Jonas said softly, "You know, if I ever write a book about my life, I'll name the first chapter after you." Danielle laughed. "And what would you call it?" He smiled. "The waitress who spoke my language." She shook her head, amused and touched. "That's a story people might actually need to hear." And with that, they walked out of the cafe together. Two lives forever changed by one moment of courage, one act of truth, and one lesson the world too often forgets. Respect is the language everyone understands.